At the outset, the masses misinterpreted it as nothing more than a scandalous rise in prices. Only later, under the name of inflation, the process was correctly comprehended as the downfall of money.
Well, I think it's quite likely that the CBDC will arrive, and it will also be the subject of the currency reset at the same time. At some point, the world is going to go into a crisis, or a country is going to go into a crisis. It might be the UK, it might be Italy, might even be the United States, but something is going to happen. Things are very, very taut in the financial world at the moment. When that happens, I think they will close the banks. You'll wake up on a Sunday afternoon or Sunday morning and hear the news that they've shut the banks, not going to open on Monday. And then by Monday evening or Tuesday, you'll get the announcement that we're having a new currency, the CBDC, and don't worry, it'll be 1-to-1 against the old currency. But there'll be some restrictions on your ability to convert your old money into the new money. So if you're poor and you have a small bank account, it'll be converted 1-to-1 straight away. And you'll probably even find that you get a free gift from the government to kickstart the system. Maybe £3,000 or £5,000 will be given to every citizen gratuitously to kickstart the system in the new CBDC. But if you have 100,000 or 1 million in the bank, you're going to be told, yes, it's 1-to-1, but you're going to have to wait to convert it to the new currency. Now, wait means never. We all know that, but they won't tell you that. They'll say it's a temporary suspension because we're in the middle of a crisis. The people are rioting in the streets, and we need to calm the system. So here's some free money, everybody. Go and enjoy yourselves. And by the way, the rich can't convert their money for a while, but they'll be able to do so later. So if you happen to own Apple bonds, they'll be denominated in the old dollars. You won't be able to. It'll still be old dollars. You won't be able to convert those old dollars until you've got the cash. But when you get the cash, you'll need permission to do it, and you're not going to get that permission. It'll be exactly like we had in Britain back before 1975, when we had the exchange controls. You needed permission from the Bank of England. I mean, I remember when I travelled abroad the first time, I was allowed to take £50 with me abroad. Didn't go very far.
Clive Thompson is a former wealth manager for one of the largest investment firms in Switzerland. He's discussing the idea of a reset of debt. This is something that we often hear about, and it's usually labeled as a surreal conspiracy. Resets have happened before and will happen again. It's not just a philosophy or theory, it's a reality.
I think the CBDC will arise as a consequence of a crisis. And when that happens, there will be a limitation on how much of your old currency you can convert at 1-to-1 with the new one, even though technically it'll be 1-to-1, so you've lost nothing. But the advantage of this, from the government's point of view, is it's to all intents and purposes wiping the slate clean, because all of their liabilities will be denominated in a currency that nobody can use, nobody can spend. So if the crisis is generated by people rushing to try and convert their money into something, into anything, firewood or whatever they're trying to do, they won't be able to use their old currency unless the poor man will be able to use it. But anybody with any wealth, like the government of China, will be stuck. So the government will be able to print away its old liabilities without any worries at all, because nobody will be able to suspend it, and it won't be able to affect the economy. The only thing which can affect the economy is the new CBDC, which will be, at least initially, touted as very sound money, at least until they start borrowing in the new currency. But then they've got a fairly long lease of life, because they'll be starting from a debt to GDP ratio of effectively zero, because they won't need to count the old debt. Of course they will from an accounting point of view, but it won't be effective.
A fundamental change is happening in the world. Crypto assets are a groundbreaking technology that is transforming the system. Right now, the dollar is used for every currency pair, but the innovation of digital currencies allows nations to bilaterally swap assets in real time. There is no longer a need for a reserve currency, and the entire banking system is structured around the US dollar and hegemony in debt.
CBDC Loop is a new initiative to create a global framework for physical and digital objects that move along with transaction on the XRP Ledger. Every transaction has a purpose and a set of information that describes the transaction. Think of XRP Ledger as the rails for moving any form of digital object. At the front of the train is the transaction object. The following objects are put together as precisely as possible to describe information about the transaction. This is why we're proposing central bank digital objects. There are two types of commonly used objects: physical objects and digital objects. The central bank will issue the objects and the stablecoin. Each government applies a layer of regulation around each specific object. Institutions and businesses can apply programmability based on the provided regulation. Further down, businesses and individuals will use and apply more details inside of each object. Our goal is to create interoperability for transactions and objects globally.
This is a central bank digital currency project proposed by a company called Centipede. It's built for the XRP Ledger, and the CEO, Rambod Rad, is a robotics engineer. This project is introducing the idea of central bank digital objects. This means that the central banks can mint an NFT to represent something specific, like you as a person could be tokenized and put directly onto the ledger.
Okay, here's an example. We have the transaction object here. You can click on it, and you can actually see the testnet here, and you can see all the transactions. This was already done before, so now the AI is actually what allows for incoming and outgoing transactions, how the objects are being created. So the AI is actually very important. It helps with the incoming and outgoing transactions. A human, for example, would be a physical object where you could put a three-dimensional mesh for the person. A digital identity, it would be, depending on what company uses it, but they will apply the identity about the individuals. And further down, you can click on the video. You can also watch the video, but the information about the video and what's inside the video, and that can further down go to be more information in there.
As the Internet of Things progresses, each object will have its own identity, and humans will be able to interact with them seamlessly. I'm conflicted because on one hand I see innovation and efficiency as a net benefit to society. However, on the other hand, I recognize that the technology like this needs to have safeguards in place to protect people's privacy. We need a digital constitution that will lay out clear rules and protections.
This is the first AMM-based DEX that I implemented natively on the XRPL. I like to call it XRPL swap. And right now, I actually skipped the login process, but you can imagine that you can connect, let's say, like a browser-based wallet to this app, like an XRPL equivalent MetaMask. And so right here, we're logged in. We've got about close to 10,000 XRP with our wallet address right here. But before we do the swapping, let's go to the pool screen. So we've got our balances here, with XRP, ETH, USD, BTC. And right now, we don't have any active positions, but we do see available pools that have been created, like BTC to USD, ETH to USD. But let's go ahead and just create our own liquidity pool. All right, so let's go with XRP, and I guess we'll go with ETH. And then let's just say that I want to do 250 XRP, and I'll do 750 ETH, right? And then here is a trading fee that I'll just set it to 0.025. So let's go ahead and create this bad boy.
ODL users and RippleNet partners can tap into liquidity on-chain and then use ODL to convert XRP to local fiat currency. The XRP Ledger becoming more and more liquid means that it can support more utility. This increased liquidity also provides opportunities for large institutions to move money through the XRP Ledger, potentially using our liquidity pools and paying us fees as they swap in and out of assets. On-chain liquidity paired with local fiat conversion through ODL makes this a seamless platform for moving money. The more liquid this becomes, the more demand there will be for XRP, since it's necessary for wallets and transaction fees on the XRP Ledger. Since it's so efficient, it will be the cheapest possible method. And with cheap prices, we as a decentralized community are competing with correspondent banks.
For too long, the lack of financial access faced by Caribbean nations and their majority Black populations has been blatantly ignored. As chairwoman of the committee, and even long before I assumed the chair, I've worked with stakeholders to combat the de-risking we've seen harm businesses and families across the Caribbean and the United States for more than 10 years. Financial access is key to a nation's stability, but for our neighbor island nations whose economies rely on cross-border transactions, they're being denied this path to prosperity and resiliency. The Caribbean is very close to the United States, not only in geography, but also in its shared economy, culture, and security. This is reflected in the mutual trade and tourism, which fuel jobs and economic growth here and in the region, as well as in the 8.5 million members of the Caribbean diaspora community who have chosen the United States as their home. We must acknowledge that our nation's security and well-being is directly linked to that of the Caribbean nations, and that dwindling financial access endangers these mutual benefits.
People will make the argument that correspondent banking will never be dethroned because they have a monopoly. Well, this is how it gets dethroned. They stopped offering cross-border payments while fintechs like Ripple offer it. It becomes a network of developing nations. XRP is a bridge to the unwanted corridors. While one corridor may be meaningless, if you have all unwanted corridors in one network, it becomes very meaningful. You pair this one large network of smaller nations against G7 currencies, and the whole developing world gets brought into the global economy. I discovered this slide. It came out on November 21st, 2023. It's Western Australia, so the University of Western Australia, and they apparently had a conference. One of the speakers was Vijay Marazetti, and Vijay was talking about blockchain and banking efficiency, global evidence from Ripple's network of adoption. So global evidence from Ripple network adoption. And when we dig into Vijay Marazetti's LinkedIn profile, he says, I am leading a research team to implement blockchain platforms for poor farmers in India for better financial inclusions with lower rates of interest. I do consulting in digital transformations for the United Nations funded agency, GAIN. Earlier, I did consulting for the World Bank funded TNRTP project. Now, we just saw in one of my last videos, the Interledger protocol was being presented by the UN. Now, if we think about what was being said with correspondent banking, de-risking, this is one of the SDGs, is to try to bring all payments into an inclusive environment. So everybody from developing nations will have bank accounts with this Western world and the global economy. This is the goal of the IMF. This is the goal of the UN. So this is why we see alignments between these organizations as well as Ripple.
An analogy to the late 19 teens. We were in the middle of the massive, most massive innovation the history of the world had seen: telephone, electricity, and automobile, all at the same time. But we had World War I, and we had the Spanish flu. Sound familiar? Now, that was much worse than what we've gone through. We've gone through nothing like that. But there were massive supply chain problems back then. And inflation peaked at 24%, right? In June of 1920. And by June of 1921, it was minus 15%. So I think that our 8 to 10% inflation, which is where it was at the peak, is going to turn around, and we're going to see some very big surprises on the inflation front. And you know who agrees with us? The bond market. Look at what the bond market is doing now. The long bond yield, 380, 75% inverted. That's telling us that the bond market is saying recession and or big surprises on the low side of inflation expectations. And it's probably both.
As we experience geopolitical turmoil, record high inflation, and groundbreaking innovation, it's important to understand how history is repeating itself. Kathy Wood has an interesting analogy regarding current market conditions, comparing them to World War I, the Spanish flu, and high inflation followed by record deflation during a boom in innovation. Jeffrey Gunlock also believes we will see negative CPI from a deflationary event. The euro-dollar curve is also pointing to massive deflation followed by money printing. We are clearly being positioned for the end of a status quo and the beginning of a new era in the global world order. The bloody uproar of the war is over. Let's enjoy the carnival of the inflation. It's loads of fun and paper, printed paper, flimsy stuff. Do they still call it money? For $5 billion of it, you can get $1. What a joke. The Yankees are coming, but as peaceful tourists this time. They purchase a Rembrandt for a sandwich, and our souls for a glass of whiskey. Krupp and Steins get rid of their debts, we of our savings. The profiteers dance in the palace hotels. Thanks everyone, I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you enjoy content like this, please consider joining my Patreon.